The distress beacon had been pinging for 6 hours before anyone else responded. Marcus Hale had noticed it on his third pass through the outer belt. A stuttering, half-dead signal on a frequency the Galactic Transit Authority had officially retired 8 years ago. He wasn't supposed to be listening to that frequency. His repair shuttle, the Perseverance, was a beat-up two-man tug contracted to service relay buoys in the Cathara Marginal Zone, and listening to retired distress bands was exactly the kind of time-wasting detour his dispatcher, a humorless woman named Petra who communicated exclusively through terse voicemail, had warned him about 17 times. He angled toward the signal anyway. The math wasn't complicated. 6 hours with no response meant either the GTA had logged it and dispatched someone, or nobody had heard it at all. Out here in the marginal zone, where the traffic lanes bent away from the interesting parts of the galaxy, and the relay buoys were old enough to have personalities, it was usually the second option. Marcus Hale was 34 years old, had been flying repair routes in fringe space for 9 of those years, and had never once been accused of being impressive. His file at the GTA Contractor Registry listed his height medium, his certifications adequate, his incident record 3 minor collisions, one of which was genuinely not his fault, and a supervisor's note from 2287 that read, "Hale is reliable and does not create drama. Adequate for low-priority assignments." He had read that note. He had thought about it for a while. Then he had gone and fixed 4 buoys in a single shift and said nothing about it to anyone. That was basically his whole personality. He brought the Perseverance around the tumbling mass of a dead mining asteroid and found the ship. It was not a small ship. That was his first thought, not elegant or terrifying or alien, just, that is not a small ship. It was roughly the size of a city block, shaped like a flattened crescent moon, and it was currently embedded in the asteroid's surface at an angle that suggested the landing had not gone according to plan. One of the crescent's tips had sheared off. Hull plating had peeled back in long strips like the skin of something that had gotten too close to a flame. 3 of the 4 running lights were dead, and the 4th was flickering in a pattern that Marcus, after a moment, recognized as Galactic Standard Distress Code. Someone on board still had enough power to talk to him. They just couldn't transmit above the old retired frequency. He matched the asteroid's slow rotation, locked a tether to the Rexport docking collar, which was, miraculously, still intact, and climbed through. The ship's interior was dim and cold, and smelled of scorched insulation and something else, something sharper, like ozone mixed with the inside of a greenhouse after a storm. The gravity plating was working on backup power, which meant it was working at about 60%, which meant Marcus's boots kept trying to drift off the deck every time he took a long step. He moved carefully. He had a medikit on his belt, a torch, a toolkit, and the emergency patch kit from the Perseverance. He was not, in any formal sense, a rescue operative. He found her in what he would later identify as the ship's secondary command suite, a smaller bridge tucked behind the main one, accessible through a corridor whose lighting was running on what must have been the very last dregs of battery reserve. She was on the floor, not collapsed across a console, not slumped in a chair on the floor, deliberately, as if she had chosen to lie down there rather than somewhere else. Her back was against the base of a navigation column, and her legs were stretched out in front of her, and she was absolutely, completely still. Marcus stopped. His torch swept across her, and he took in the details the way he always took in things that needed assessing, piece by piece, no conclusions until he had enough pieces. She was tall, he could tell that even lying down. Her skin was the deep blue-gray of deep ocean water on a cloudy day, and it had a faint luminescence to it, not bright, just a quality of not quite darkness that he couldn't fully explain. Her hair, which was spread around her on the cold deck, was silver-white and very long. She wore something that was either armor or formal clothing or possibly both, fitted plates of a dark material over a structured inner garment, the whole assembly somehow managing to look simultaneously military and ceremonial. Whatever it was damaged. 3 of the chest plates were cracked. 1 had been torn away entirely, and beneath it, through the inner garment, he could see that she was bleeding. The blood was not red. It was closer to violet. It had soaked through and dried at the edges but was still wet at the center, which told him the wound was recent enough to still be open and deep enough to be serious. He crossed to her and crouched down. Her eyes were open. That was the second thing he noticed. He'd expected them to be closed. They were open and they were on him, and they were a color he didn't have a word for, something between amber and gold and the particular shade of afternoon light through very old glass. They were also, despite everything, completely focused. "Human," she said. Her voice was low and controlled and had the quality of someone who had decided, at some point earlier in whatever ordeal had brought her to this floor, that she was not going to sound afraid. She mostly succeeded. "Yeah," Marcus said. He set his kit down and opened it. "Where else are you hurt, aside from," he gestured at the visible wound. Her eyes tracked him, but she didn't answer immediately. He could see her measuring something, deciding something. "I have a punctured second lung," she said finally. "The ship's medical unit was destroyed in the impact. I have been managing the bleeding manually for approximately 4 of your hours." A pause. "I calculated that the probability of rescue was less than 12%. The beacon was a courtesy." "A courtesy to who?" "To whomever found the wreck after I was gone," she said, "so they would know what had occurred and not search unnecessarily." Marcus looked at her for a moment, then he looked back at his kit. "Okay," he said, "so you were writing yourself off." "I was being realistic." "Right." He found the emergency pressure bandaging and the tissue sealant, both rated for standard humanoid biology, which covered about 60% of the species the GTA officially tracked. He had no idea if she was in that 60%. "Can I touch you? I need to look at the wound." Another measuring pause. "Yes." He worked carefully and without rushing, which was something he had learned to do in 9 years of fixing things that did not want to be touched, and in spaces where dropping a component meant losing it forever. He peeled back what remained of the damaged armor plate. She made no sound while he did it. The wound was a deep shearing laceration, probably from a piece of hull shrapnel, and it was bad enough that he understood how she'd made her calculation and wasn't entirely wrong about it. But it hadn't hit anything catastrophically central. The bleeding had slowed because she'd been doing exactly what she said, managing it manually, pressure and positioning, for 4 hours on the floor of a ship that was slowly dying around her. "You've been holding this together yourself," he said, not quite a question. "Yes. For 4 hours. Approximately." He sat back on his heels and looked at her. "That's pretty impressive." She looked at him as if the concept of a human finding her impressive had not previously occurred to her as a category of thing that could exist. "It was necessary," she said. "Sure, still." He applied the sealant and the pressure bandaging as best he could, working around the armor and the geometry of her injuries, and the fact that her anatomy was similar to his but not identical. Her second lung, he had to take her word for that. Human anatomy didn't run to second lungs, was a problem he couldn't fix on the floor of a wrecked ship with a standard medikit. What he could do was stabilize the bleeding and get her somewhere that wasn't slowly losing atmosphere. "My ship is small," he said as he worked. 2-man tug, so technically it's built for 2, but one of those spots is my toolkit and my lunch. I can move some things. The medical bay is," he paused because calling it a medical bay was generous. "There's a cabinet with a better kit than this one, and the temperature regulation works." "You are proposing to take me aboard?" "Yeah." "Why?" He looked up at her. She was watching him with those amber gold eyes, and there was something in her expression he couldn't fully read, not suspicion exactly, more like she was genuinely asking. like she expected an answer that made sense. "Because you're hurt and your ship is dying and mine isn't," he said. "That's the whole reason." She was quiet for a moment. "You do not know who I am." "I don't know anybody out here," Marcus said. "Marginal zone, pretty much just buoys." Something moved across her face. He wasn't sure what it was. It was gone before he could categorize it. "Very well," she said. "I will accept your assistance." "Great." He finished with the bandaging and started thinking about the logistics of moving a tall, injured, armored alien woman through a corridor with 60% gravity and a tether-connected docking collar. "This might be a little undignified," he said. "The transfer, I mean. I'm going to try to make it as not undignified as possible, but I want to be honest with you about my expectations." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are a very strange human," she said. "I get that a lot," Marcus said. Her name, she told him 2 hours later, was Vale. Just Vale. No other name offered, no explanation of the lack of one. He didn't push. In his experience, people who gave you one name instead of two either had a very simple reason or a very complicated one. And either way, it wasn't his business unless it became his business. He had gotten her aboard the Perseverance, which had involved a combination of the tether line, a cargo sling he normally used for recovering buoy components, and an amount of improvisation that he was privately proud of. She had not complained once. She had also, at one point, directed him on a more efficient angle for the sling from a position of being actively in the sling, which he had appreciated. The Perseverance's medical cabinet turned out to have a tissue regenerator that was technically rated for use on, he checked the label, humanoid species with bilateral symmetry and standard carbon-based biology. Vale met at least 2 of those criteria. He used it anyway, with her consent and her coaching, because she turned out to know considerably more about her own physiology than he did, which was not a surprise. The second lung issue was trickier. He had oxygen supplementation equipment, and she walked him through a configuration that was apparently used as a field measure on her homeworld for exactly this kind of injury. He did what she told him to do. It worked. Not perfectly. She would need actual medical attention at an actual medical facility, which the nearest one was about 14 hours away at the Perseverance's best speed. But well enough that her breathing evened out, and the gray around the edges quality he'd noticed in her luminescent skin started to fade. She was sitting in his co-pilot chair. He was flying. The asteroid was falling behind them. 14 hours to Station Meridian, he said. "They've got a decent med center. I'm going to call ahead and flag your arrival so they're ready." "No," she said. He glanced over. "No to the call ahead, or no to Meridian?" "No to announcing my arrival." Her voice had recovered some of its original quality, the controlled, measured register of someone accustomed to choosing every word carefully. "Station Meridian is adequate. The call ahead is not necessary." Marcus thought about this. "I want to make sure they're ready for you." "I understand. I am asking you not to." He turned that over for a moment. Someone who had just survived a serious injury, who he'd found alone on a wrecked ship with no crew and no indication of how she'd ended up there, who gave one name instead of 2, and was now specifically asking him not to announce her presence at the nearest station. "Okay," he said, "no call ahead." She looked at him. "What?" he said. "You agreed very quickly. You asked me not to do something and gave me a reason. The reason was not necessary. That's good enough for me." He checked his navigation. "If it becomes a medical issue, I might revisit, but right now you're stable and Meridian's 14 hours out, so." Vale was quiet for a moment. "Most humans, in my experience," she said, "require more justification than that. Most humans, in my experience, haven't just spent 4 hours holding their own wound shut while writing their own obituary on a dead ship," Marcus said. "You get some credit." She looked away, out the forward viewport. Where the stars were the particular sharp and unblinking kind you only got this far out from any system with real light pollution. He watched her look at them and thought she probably wasn't seeing stars. She was somewhere else in her head. He'd seen that look before, not on aliens, just on people. It was the look of someone who had just passed through something very bad and was now in the strange quiet on the other side of it, and wasn't sure yet what to do with the fact that they were still alive. He turned back to his instruments and let her have it. After a while she said, "What is your name?" "Marcus Hale." "Marcus Hale," she repeated. "You repair relay buoys." "Mostly. Sometimes I bring dead ships back from the outer belt, but that's extra and Petra doesn't like it when I go off route." He paused. "Petra is my dispatcher. She's not going to be thrilled about this detour. I will compensate you." "I'm not, that's not why I brought it up." He shifted in his seat. "I brought it up because I'm going to have to explain the 14-hour delay on my buoy service log and Petra is going to write me another note." "What kind of note?" "She writes notes on my file. I have, at last count, 22 of them. They're mostly in the vein of Hale is adequate but does not follow protocol, which is fair. I don't usually." Something shifted in Vale's expression, something careful, like she was recalibrating. "And yet you come when you hear a distress beacon on a retired frequency." "Somebody has to." "Many people could have. None of them did." 6-hour window in the outer belt, Marcus said. "Most of the traffic out here is automated. The manned ships stick to the lanes." He shrugged. "I was off lane fixing a buoy that was oscillating weirdly. Right place, wrong time to be right place, if that makes sense." "It does," she said, "more than you know." He glanced at her. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read, and he had the odd feeling she was seeing something other than what he thought she was seeing. He put it aside. People in shock sometimes got strange. "Get some rest if you can," he said. "I'll wake you if anything changes." She didn't answer immediately. Then, "You have done this before, brought someone back." "Twice. Asteroid miner with a suit breach about 3 years ago. And a GTA inspector whose nav computer fried on her in the outer Cathara Pass." He paused. "She wrote me a very nice card. Miner bought me a drink." "And the notes on your file?" "3 of them are specifically about those rescues," Marcus said. "Unauthorized detour, failure to maintain service schedule, 1 count of operating beyond contracted operational parameters." Vale looked at him for a long moment. "Your institution penalizes you for saving lives." "My dispatcher penalizes me for going off route. The institution doesn't know about it mostly." He tilted his head. "I figure the miner and the inspector don't need the paperwork either." The silence that settled after that was different from the earlier one. He couldn't have said exactly how. It just was. She slept for 6 hours, which he was glad about, because her body needed it and because he had some thinking to do. The thinking was mostly about the ship. He'd run a quick external scan on the wreck before they left the asteroid, because he had the scanner and the habit, and because wreck reports were technically required even when you weren't officially supposed to be in that sector. The ship was large enough to be in a class that the GTA didn't permit to operate without a minimum crew of 20. He had found 1 person on it. The ship's registry transponder was either destroyed or deliberately offline. He couldn't tell which. And the design itself, the crescent shape and the material of the hull plating and the particular configuration of the running lights, didn't match any civilian class he'd seen in 12 years of fringe space work. He'd seen GTA enforcement vessels. He'd seen colony ships. He'd seen the 2 classes of alien diplomatic carriers that were currently permitted in GTA-managed space. This ship was none of those things. He wasn't going to bring it up. It wasn't his business. She was injured and he was bringing her to medical care, and whatever her ship was or had been was a matter for someone with more authority than a buoy repair technician. But he looked at his nav screen and he thought about it, and he thought about the fact that she'd given him one name and asked him not to announce her arrival, and he added it all up without arriving at a conclusion. She woke when they were about 3 hours from meridian. He heard her shift in the co-pilot chair, and then the specific quality of stillness that told him she was conscious and orienting. 3 hours out, he said, without turning around so she'd have a moment if she needed it. Yes, a pause. How are you not tired? I've done 14-hour solo legs before. Lots of coffee. He gestured at the thermos on the console. There's more if you want. I don't know if it works on you the same way. You probably shouldn't have it if you're on anything for the pain. I have had nothing for the pain. He turned at that. There's analgesic in the med kit I should have. I did not want to be impaired. She met his eyes. I needed to remain alert. He opened his mouth, closed it, then, alert for what? You're safe. The ship's not going anywhere. She looked at him steadily. I have been in situations where I believed I was safe, she said, and I was not. Marcus turned that over. Then he turned back to his instruments, reached into the kit that was still wedged between the seats, and held out the analgesic without commenting on what she'd said. She took it after a moment. He heard her breathe out carefully as it started to work. The particular quality of someone who had been holding something clenched for too long and was slowly learning that they didn't have to anymore. Tell me about your work, she said. The buoys. So he told her about the buoys. He told her about the oscillating one that had been what put him in her neighborhood. It had developed a harmonic resonance with a nearby asteroid's rotation, which was a problem nobody had thought to design against because nobody had run the orbital projections for this particular stretch of the belt in 20 years. He told her about the fix, which involved recalibrating the emission cycle and also hitting the unit 3 times with a torque driver in a very specific way, which was the kind of fix that worked, and also the kind you didn't put in the official report because it sounded like you didn't know what you were doing. He told her about Petra's notes and about the miner with the suit breach. His name was Dorval, and he had a daughter who sent Marcus a drawing every year on the anniversary of the rescue, which he kept folded in his logbook. He told her about the way the light looked in the outer belt, this far from any star, the way it stripped away everything except the true dark and made the stars look like they were hanging on nothing. She listened, not politely actually. He could tell the difference. She asked questions, specific ones. She asked why the harmonic resonance problem hadn't been flagged by the GTA's monitoring systems. He explained, with some enthusiasm, the various ways in which the GTA's monitoring systems were optimistic about their own capabilities. She asked about Dorval's daughter. She asked what he kept in the logbook besides drawings. He told her. Maintenance records, personal notes, a photograph of the view from the maintenance hatch on the Perseverance's dorsal hull at the exact right moment in the outer pass, where you could see 3 stellar nurseries simultaneously, which was the most beautiful thing he'd personally ever seen, and he'd never successfully described it to anyone. I would like to see that, she said. The photo's not great, phone camera bad framing. I would still like to see it. He pulled it up on his comm and passed it to her. She looked at it for a long time. You are right, she said. The photograph is not great. Told you. But I can see what you saw. She passed it back. That is enough. They were quiet for a while after that. Not an awkward quiet. The kind that settles between two people who have run out of things they need to say and found they don't mind. Meridian Station was a mid-tier way station, the kind that had medical facilities because something had to be here and a bar because something always was. It orbited a brown dwarf that provided just enough light to give everything a faint amber cast at certain angles, which was either atmospheric or depressing depending on your mood. Marcus docked the Perseverance in Bay 12, which he had a standing arrangement on because he passed through Meridian roughly once a month. The dock attendant, a 4-armed being named Cresset who had known Marcus for years, started toward the ship, and then stopped when Vale came down the ramp. Marcus watched Cresset's 4 arms go still in a very specific way. Then Cresset looked at Marcus, then back at Vale. "Med Center," Marcus said. "She needs the level 2 suite, I think. Can you?" "Of course," Cresset said very quietly. "Yes, of course." Marcus noticed the tone. He filed it away. The Med Center was 4 minutes from Bay 12 on foot, and Vale walked the distance without assistance, which he respected and also slightly worried about. She moved carefully, holding herself very upright, and he stayed close without hovering in case. The medical technician at the intake desk was a human woman in her 40s named Benway, who Marcus had dealt with before, and who had the practical, unsentimental quality of someone who'd been working a fringe station med center for too long to be surprised by much. She was surprised. It wasn't obvious. Marcus caught it only because he was watching her, the slight widening of her eyes, the very brief pause before she composed herself and said, professionally, "I'll need to take your information to Vale." And then, "Are you under any active warrants or travel restrictions that would affect?" "I am not," Vale said. "My name is Vale. I have a punctured secondary lung and a shearing wound to the upper torso that has been treated in the field. I require evaluation and stabilization." "Of course." Benway's voice was perfectly level. She typed something into her console. Marcus noticed, because he noticed things, that she typed it very quickly, and then the screen angled away from him. He didn't comment on that either. They took Vale back and left Marcus in the waiting area, which had 7 chairs and a beverage dispenser that smelled optimistic and produced something that wasn't quite coffee. He got a cup of it and sat down. Cresset appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later. Marcus looked at him. "You didn't know," Cresset said. "It wasn't a question." "Know what?" Cresset's 4 arms moved in a gesture Marcus associated with, "Please don't make me explain this." "Her," he said. "Who she is." "She told me her name was Vale." "Her name," Cresset said carefully, "is Empress Valethar Sorn Keth. She rules the Keth sovereignty. The sovereignty controls 11 star systems and has a combined military strength of approximately 47,000 warships." A pause. "She has been missing for 9 days. Half the galaxy has been looking for her." Marcus held his cup of not coffee for a moment. "Huh," he said. "Half the galaxy," Cresset said again with emphasis. "Including, I should mention, 3 Keth warships that arrived at the far edge of this system about 2 hours ago and are currently on course for Meridian." "Did they hear about her?" "I don't know how. I only told Benway." "Benway flagged them," Marcus said, "when she typed and turned the screen." "Probably." Cresset sat down in one of the other chairs, which was not really designed for him. "Marcus, she's the most powerful sovereign in this quadrant. Her sovereignty's territory borders ours. She's been the target of 2 known assassination attempts in the last year." He looked at Marcus with his large, expressive eyes. "And you found her on a dead ship in the outer belt." "In a retired frequency distress window," Marcus said. "Yeah." "Weren't you frightened?" Marcus thought about it seriously. "I was worried about the secondary lung," he said. "And there was a moment with the cargo sling that was genuinely dicey. Other than that, she just seemed like someone who was hurt and needed help." Cresset looked at him for a long moment. "That is either very simple or very profound," he said. "Probably just very simple." The 3 Keth warships arrived at Meridian 4 hours later. Marcus was still in the waiting area, having consumed 3 more cups of not coffee, and repaired a loose panel on the beverage dispenser that Benway had thanked him for doing, because it had been loose for 2 months. He was in the middle of explaining to Cresset why the oscillating buoys problem was actually very interesting from a resonance dynamics perspective, when the waiting room door opened, and 3 beings came in who made the room feel immediately smaller. They were Keth soldiers. He knew that the way you knew a storm was coming, not from data, from something more fundamental. They wore armor that was darker than veils and bore more damage repair scarring, the kind you got from actual deployment. The one in the lead was tall even by Keth standards, with the silver-blue luminescence that seemed common to the species but brighter, more polished, and an expression that communicated clearly that she was accustomed to rooms reshaping themselves around her arrival. Her name, Marcus would learn later, was Commander Sarath, and she was second in personal rank only to the Empress herself. She looked at Marcus the way people looked at things they needed to assess, and didn't expect to take long to assess. "You are the human who brought Her Imperial Majesty to this station," she said. "Not a question." "Marcus Hale," he said. "Buoy repair, yes." Sarath looked at him for a moment. "You had no knowledge of her identity." "She told me her name was Vale." Something moved through Sarath's expression. "And you still brought her here." "She was hurt," Marcus said. "Her ship was dying. I had a working ship." Sarath looked at him for another moment. Then she looked at Cresset and said something in Keth that Marcus didn't catch, and Cresset's 4 arms made a gesture he couldn't interpret. Then Sarath turned back to Marcus. "The Empress will want to speak with you," she said. "I figured," Marcus said. "Is she doing okay? The secondary lung Benway said the prognosis was good, but I don't know how much weight to put on good." Sarath blinked. It was a very small blink, but Marcus was watching. "She is stable," Sarath said. "She will recover fully." "Good," he nodded. "That's good." They let him in to see her 2 hours later, after the Keth medical team from the warships had gone over every treatment Benway had provided, and apparently concluded it was acceptable. He was shown into the Level 2 suite by a Keth soldier, who kept 2 steps behind him the entire way, which was either an honor guard or a precaution, and possibly both. Vale, the Empress Valithar Sorn Keth, was sitting up in the medical suite's main bed, which the Keth team had apparently upgraded with additional equipment from the warship. She looked better. The gray at the edges quality was entirely gone now, her luminescence steady and clear, and someone had brought her a change of clothing that was clean and undamaged, though it was still the particular kind of structured garment that sat right at the edge of armor and formal dress. She looked at him when he came in. "Hello," Marcus said. "Hello, Marcus Hale." He sat in the chair next to the bed, because there was one, and because standing with a guard 2 steps behind him was going to get uncomfortable. "Commander Sarath tells me you're doing well." "I am," she watched him. "Cresset told you." "Yeah. You seem unconcerned." Marcus considered. "About which part?" "About any of it." She tilted her head slightly. "I told you I was afraid of being impaired. I did not explain why. You did not ask." "It seemed like explaining would have required trusting me more than you were ready to." She was quiet for a moment. "You worked that out from context." 9 years of working alone in the fringe belt," he said. "You get good at not pushing." "Most people," she said slowly, "upon learning who I am, immediately recalibrate. They either become very eager to please or very careful to appear appropriately deferential, sometimes both." Her amber gold eyes were steady on him. "You have not recalibrated. You're still the same person who spent 4 hours holding yourself together on a cold floor," Marcus said. "That doesn't change because of the warships." Something moved across her expression again, the same thing he hadn't been able to categorize the first time. He thought he had a better guess at it now. He still wasn't certain enough to name it. "I will ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer honestly." "I usually do. Why was the distress beacon on a retired frequency?" Marcus blinked. That was not what he had expected her to ask. He thought about it. "Because whoever was running it either didn't know it was retired, which seems unlikely for someone operating a ship that size, or chose it specifically because it was retired, because mainstream traffic wouldn't catch it." "Yes. You didn't want to be found," he said, "or not by whoever was most likely to respond on active frequencies." There is an active investigation into the 2 assassination attempts, she said carefully. The investigation has not been completed. There are individuals within range of active frequencies who I have reason not to trust. A pause. I calculated that retired frequencies would be heard only by the kind of traffic that does not move in coordinated patterns. Marginal zone repair contractors, independent haulers, people working alone, people with no stake in the political situation. People with no stake, she agreed. And I hoped enough basic decency to respond to a distress call without immediately consulting anyone about whether it was beneficial to do so. Marcus sat with that for a moment. You were betting on random chance producing someone honest. I was calculating probability distributions. The corner of her mouth moved. It was very slight. The calculation did not specifically produce you, but you are a satisfying result. High praise, Marcus said. Satisfying result. From me, she said quietly, it is. He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. He'd learned over the years that the instinct to fill silence was usually wrong. There is something else, Vale said. The Keth medical team reviewed the field treatment you provided. The tissue sealant configuration, the pressure bandaging technique, the oxygen supplementation setup. A pause. They said it was correct, not approximate correct. You coached me through most of it. I coached you through the oxygen supplementation. The sealant and the bandaging you did yourself. I had a medikit and the instructions on the label. The instructions on the label, she said, are for standard humanoid species. My physiology has 5 points of significant divergence from standard humanoid. 2 of those divergences were directly relevant to the wound treatment. The label does not account for them. She looked at him. And yet, Marcus thought about it. He remembered looking at the wound and thinking about the angles and the depth and the way the bleeding was behaving, and making choices based on what? Not the label, he supposed. Experience. Pattern. The kind of inference you developed in 9 years of fixing things that weren't quite like the things you'd been trained to fix. I just looked at what was there, he said. The wound, I mean, not what I expected. Most people, she said, look at what they expect. He shrugged. Doesn't help much with oscillating buoys. She looked at him for a long moment. There was something in her face that he thought, for the first time, he could actually read. Not quite wonder. Something quieter than wonder, something that had come in from the other side of expectation. Marcus Hale, she said, you are the most comprehensively ordinary human I have ever met. That's accurate. And, she said, you are the first person in 11 years who has helped me without wanting anything from it. He opened his mouth, closed it. Then, because it seemed true and also because anything more elaborate would have been wrong, I wanted you to be okay. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she looked away, out the small porthole in the medical suite's wall, where you could see, at this angle, the faint amber cast of the brown dwarf and beyond it the absolute dark of open space. Sarath will want to debrief you, she said. She will also attempt to compensate you financially, which is the Keth standard response to actions that defy easy categorization. I have instructed her that the amount she is considering is insufficient. I know you don't need it, she said. That is not the point. The point is that some things should be acknowledged proportionally to what they actually are. She turned back to him. I will also need to discuss with you the matter of the investigation, because you are, technically, a witness to the fact that my ship was destroyed in deep space without any official record of transit, which makes you relevant to the security inquiry. I understand. That inquiry will take some time. You will need to remain available. She paused. This is, I recognize, an imposition on your service schedule. Petra's going to write another note, Marcus said. I will, she said, write to Petra myself. He looked at her. You're going to write a note to my dispatcher. To explain the circumstances. and to indicate that any professional consequences to you resulting from your actions in this matter would be regarded by the Keth sovereignty as an unfriendly act. She's going to frame it, Marcus said. Vale's expression did the thing again, the one he'd been watching for. This time it had gone far enough that he could finally name it. It was amusement, but underneath it was something real and quiet and considering. I imagine she will, Vale said. He spent 6 days at Meridian Station. It was not how he had planned to spend them, but then, he rarely planned much beyond the current service route. He gave a full debrief to Sarath, who was exact and thorough, and who, by the 3rd session, had dropped the studied professional distance she started with, and was asking him questions the way someone asked questions when they were genuinely trying to understand something rather than document it. He also, because they were stuck on the same station, and because he was not the kind of person who sat in waiting rooms indefinitely when there were things to do, repaired 2 malfunctioning environmental units in the Keth warship's secondary airlock, at the request of the engineering chief, who had watched him fix the beverage dispenser in the med center waiting room with an expression of the particular professional admiration that transcended species. He was careful to note in his work order that he was operating outside his certified competency, and that the repair should be inspected by a qualified Keth systems engineer before being relied upon. The engineering chief found this charming in a way that Marcus did not entirely understand. He saw Vale twice more during those 6 days. Both times she was recovering and occupied with the apparatus of governance that the warships had brought with them, advisors, reports, secure communications that cleared the room, but both times she made time to speak with him. Not about the investigation, about the photograph of the 3 stellar nurseries, about Dorval's daughter, about the specific physics of oscillating harmonic resonance in aged relay buoys. On the 6th day, she called him to her suite in the morning. The investigation has made progress, she said. I am returning to Keth sovereign space this afternoon. I figured you'd be heading out soon. He had the photograph on his comm. She'd asked to see it again the day before. He slid it across the table toward her. For the trip. She looked at it. You are giving this to me. I can take another one on the next outer pass. The angle's there every 16 days approximately. Approximately. I'm not always on schedule. She picked up the comm, looked at the photograph for a moment, then set it carefully in front of her. The Keth sovereignty has a position, she said, that has been vacant for 3 years. It is titled, in the approximate translation, The Sovereignty's Eyes in Fringe Space. The role involves working with the GTA to ensure early warning on anomalous events in the marginal zones that the sovereignty's own monitoring does not catch. She paused. It has been vacant because the candidates put forward have all been, in various ways, unsuitable. Marcus looked at her. The role requires someone who listens to retired frequencies, she said, who investigates oscillating buoys, who does not check whether helping someone is advantageous before deciding to help. She met his eyes. Who looks at what is actually there, not at what they expect. I'm a buoy repair technician, Marcus said. You are also, as I have cause to know, competent at field medicine, emergency hull assessment, sling rig logistics, and the repair of beverage dispensers and environmental airlock units. She tilted her head very slightly. The role pays considerably more than your current contract. You would report to Sarath in an administrative sense, and to me in every meaningful sense. You would spend most of your time in exactly the kind of space you currently work in. The fringe belt. And similar zones. Marginal, overlooked, the places that do not get monitored because they are not considered worth monitoring. He thought about Petra. He thought about the notes on his file, 22 of them. He thought about Dorval's daughter and her drawings, which he would still receive wherever he was stationed. He thought about the moment he had walked into that dark ship and found her on the floor with her eyes open, already measuring him. Can I have a day to think about it? He said. Of course. She pushed the photograph com back across the table toward him. Keep it. Take another one in 16 days and send me the comparison. It'll look the same. That is not the point, she said. The point is that some things should be recorded consistently over time. He picked up the com. That's not what you said yesterday. I may have updated my thinking. In one day. I update my thinking when I have new information. She looked at him. I have had, recently, significant new information. He held that for a moment, then he put the com in his pocket. I'll let you know tomorrow, he said. I know, she said. You will say yes. You don't know that. You responded to a retired distress frequency in the outer belt because someone might need help, she said quietly. This is the same frequency, Marcus Hale. You are already listening. He stood in the doorway for a moment after she said it. The amber cast of the brown dwarf was coming through the porthole, laying a stripe of faint, warm light across the floor between them. He thought about what she'd said. He thought about the way she'd looked when he'd crouched down next to her on that cold deck and said, simply, yeah. The way she'd looked at him, as if she was recalculating something she had decided long before, and finding the answer different. He thought about being ordinary, about the fact that he had looked at what was there and not at what he expected, and that she had noticed. That she had noticed because almost no one did. That she had built a calculation around that fact, broadcasting on a retired frequency to the marginal zone, and the calculation had worked, and she had not expected it to work, and that was the part that had changed something in her. He had not saved the galaxy's most feared Empress because he was extraordinary. He had saved her because he was himself, because he answered distress calls and asked before he touched someone and described a bad photograph honestly, and said the reason for things simply when he knew them and didn't push when he didn't. The same things he did every day in the outer belt, with the buoys and the not coffee and the notes from Petra. The same things he would keep doing wherever he was. I'll let you know tomorrow, he said again. She looked at him with those amber gold eyes, and the amusement was back, and underneath it the quiet consideration, and underneath that something that was very new and very careful and had no name yet in either of their languages. Tomorrow, she agreed. He walked out into the amber light of Meridian Station, past Sereth's guards and Cresset's 4 careful arms and Benway's practical efficiency, back to Bay 12 and the Perseverance and the photo of 3 stellar nurseries in a bad frame, and he thought about the stars, and about what it meant to listen on frequencies that nobody else was listening to, and he thought about the particular quality of someone who had stopped waiting to die and started breathing again. He called Petra. Hale, she said, without preamble, because it was always without preamble. I'm going to need to file for an extended leave of absence, he said. Possibly a career change, but I'll know more tomorrow. There was a pause. Is this about the off-route detour? Tangentially. Another pause, longer. Is there a note going on your file? Actually, Marcus said, I think there might be a note going on your file, from the Keth Sovereignty. They said to tell you they're considering it an unfriendly act. The silence on the line was very long. Hale, Petra finally said. Yeah. You are, she said, in a voice that was grudging and also possibly something else, something she would never admit to, the most comprehensively improbable person I have ever employed. That's the second time someone said something like that to me today, Marcus said. Did the first person mean it as a compliment? He looked out the maintenance hatch, where the dark of the outer belt met the faint amber of the dwarf, where the stars were sharp and clear and very far away, where 16 days from now the stellar nurseries would be visible again at exactly the right angle. I think she did, he said. Yeah. He sent the message to Vale at 600 the next morning, before he'd had coffee or revised it. That was deliberate. He'd learned over the years that the things he said before revision were usually more accurate than the things he said after, because revision mostly consisted of him talking himself out of the truth in favor of something that sounded more reasonable. The message was 4 sentences. Yes. I'll need 2 weeks to close out my current contracts. I should tell you that I'm not a diplomat and I'm not going to become one. The third stellar nursery photograph is always the clearest. The angle is best around day 12 of the 16-day cycle. Her reply came 40 minutes later, which surprised him because he hadn't expected her to be awake, and apparently she had not been asleep either. The message was also 4 sentences. I know you aren't a diplomat. That is not what I need. Sarath will contact you with the formal arrangements. The first photograph in the comparison series should be taken from the same position as the original. He read it twice, then he went and got coffee. The 2 weeks of contract closeout were less complicated than he expected, mostly because 3 of his 6 remaining buoy service stops were in the outer Cathara Pass, where Vale's warships were still in transit. And Sarath, who he was beginning to understand was an extremely efficient administrator wearing the exterior of a very intimidating military commander, had filed some kind of diplomatic coordination request with the GTA that streamlined his schedule without his doing anything about it. Petra had received the letter from the Keth sovereignty. He knew this because she called him, which she had done perhaps 3 times in 9 years. It arrived on official sovereign diplomatic letterhead, she said. With a seal. I heard it was going to be official. It says, he heard paper rustling, which was unusual because Petra did not use paper, that the Keth sovereignty regards any professional or financial penalty incurred by Marcus Hale of GTA Contractor Registry number 447B as, and I'm quoting, a discourtesy to the sovereignty that will be noted. A pause. And then it thanks me for operating a reliable contractor network that produces personnel of Marcus Hale's quality. That's very kind of them. Marcus. Her voice was the particular kind of level that meant she had multiple things to say and was choosing between them carefully. Did you know who she was when you responded to the signal? No. Did you find out before you brought her to Meridian? No. And if you had known? He thought about it honestly. I probably would have been more nervous, he said, but I would have done the same thing. Petra was quiet for a moment. Then, the note I'm going to put on your file, she said, is going to say that you are the most improbable contractor I have ever employed and that your instincts are, against all available evidence, apparently correct. You're going to write that on my official file. No, she said. I'm going to write that you are adequate and do not follow protocol, but I am going to think the other thing. He was smiling before she ended the call. Sarath's formal arrangements, when they arrived, were thorough in the way that things were thorough when someone very competent had put considerable time into them. The role was officially titled Marginal Zone Liaison, Intelligence Function, Fringe Operations, which was a title constructed to communicate precisely nothing to anyone reading a personnel manifest, which he suspected was intentional. The operational brief was simpler. Patrol the zones that nobody else was watching, listen to the frequencies that nobody else was listening to, report what he found to Sarath's office directly, and when relevant to the Empress herself. He would keep the perseverance. That was a condition he had named, and Sarath had agreed to without discussion, which told him either it was a small thing to the sovereignty or Vale had told her to agree. He suspected the latter. On his last night at Meridian, he went to Bay 12 and sat in the Perseverance's open maintenance hatch and looked out at the outer belt. The amber light from the dwarf was dimming toward its daily nadir, which made the stars sharper, and there was a cluster of 3 stellar nurseries at 47 degrees off the bow that wasn't the same as his 3 but was something, and he looked at them for a while. He thought about the kind of life he was moving toward. It wasn't so different from the kind he'd had. The same outer belt routes, the same fringe space, the same need for someone to be paying attention in the places that weren't considered worth paying attention to. The difference was that now when he found something, there was somewhere to send it that wasn't just Petra's voicemail and a note on a service log. He also thought, more briefly and more carefully, about the Empress. She was not a simple thing to think about, partly because she was not a simple person, and partly because the situation itself was not simple, and partly because Marcus had spent 9 years getting very good at not wanting things he didn't have, and he wasn't sure that skill was going to be useful in the same way going forward. He had looked at what was there, she had said, not what he expected. He thought about what was there. What was there was a person who had built a very careful calculation around the hope that someone decent might be listening to a frequency nobody used. A person who had spent 4 hours holding her own wound shut and had described it as a courtesy to the person who would eventually find her body. A person who asked what he kept in his logbook and actually listened to the answer. A person who had called him satisfying with an inflection that meant something larger than the word. He thought about her eyes in the amber light, the way the careful consideration in them had started to move into something that didn't have a name yet. He was 34 years old, and he had never been accused of being impressive, and he thought that might actually be the point. He took a photograph of the almost 3 stellar nurseries and sent it to her with no message. She replied, 40 minutes later, with, "The angle is slightly off. You'll need to reposition 17 degrees to port for the original comparison." He was still smiling when he powered down the hatch lights and got some sleep. The first week of the new assignment was mostly administrative. He filed formal paperwork with the GTA, transferring his contractor registration to a Keth Sovereignty-affiliated role, which generated 17 automated responses and 2 human callbacks, and 1 slightly confused voicemail from a GTA regional coordinator who wanted to understand what, exactly, a marginal zone liaison intelligence function fringe operations contractor was, and whether it required a different class of navigation certification. He explained it as best he could, which was, he was going to keep doing what he'd been doing, just with better reporting channels. The coordinator seemed dissatisfied with this but let it go. Sarath called him on day 4 to check on the transition. He had the impression, by this point, that Sarath had decided he was something she needed to actively track, the way you tracked a piece of equipment that had unusual failure modes but unusual utility. "How are the administrative requirements proceeding?" she asked. 17 automated responses so far, 2 human callbacks. I think I'm going to need a different navigation certification. I will have our legal team file a GTA exemption. You have a legal team that handles GTA navigation certifications. We have a legal team that handles everything, Sarath said, with the particular flatness of someone who spent most of her time surrounded by the apparatus of a large sovereign power and had stopped noticing how large it was. "Is there anything else you require?" "A question," he said. "Ask it." "The assassination attempts. You're comfortable with me operating in the fringe without knowing who was behind them." There was a pause. "The investigation has identified the primary actors," Sarath said carefully. "They are no longer a threat. There are secondary actors who remain unidentified but whose focus is unlikely to be on fringe zone liaisons." Another pause, slightly longer. "Her Majesty believes you will be safe." "That wasn't quite my question," Marcus said. "My question was whether I should be watching for anything specific." Sarath was quiet for a moment. Then, unusual traffic on secure frequencies in the outer Cathara belt, any Crescent-class vessels operating without registry transponders. Any indication that someone is watching the marginal zone monitoring buoys rather than relying on them. A pause. "In other words, the same things you would notice anyway, just with better reporting channels." "Precisely. There was something in Sarath's voice that might have been, in another context, warmth. "You are not what I expected," she said, "when I first assessed you at Meridian." "What did you expect?" "Someone who would either leverage the situation or be overwhelmed by it," she said. "You did neither. You fixed the environmental units in our secondary airlock." "They needed fixing." "Yes." A pause. "They did. The engineer who filed the inspection report noted that your work was precise and correctly documented with appropriate competency caveats." She paused again. She said she had never seen a foreign national voluntarily caveat their own repair work before. "Seemed like the right call." "It was the right call," Sarath said. "It is usually not the call people make." He thought about that after the call ended. He thought about it the way he thought about buoys that were oscillating at unexpected frequencies, not with alarm, just with attention. The Keth sovereignty was, by Cresset's accounting, a substantial power. 47,000 warships, 11 star systems, a structure built on thousands of years of empire and sovereignty, and the particular gravity that came from being, for a very long time, the most feared thing in a large piece of space. And somewhere in that structure, a woman had spent 4 hours on a cold floor counting down the probability of rescue and aiming her last transmission at the fringe, because she thought the fringe was where the honest people were. He thought about that, and then he went back to his nav log and planned his first official patrol. He was 16 days out from Meridian, in the outer Kethara Pass at the exact right position, when his comm chimed. He looked at the screen. It was the Empress. Not Sarath. The Empress from her personal diplomatic frequency, which he had in his contacts now because Sarath had added it without comment when she'd sent over the formal arrangements. He accepted the call. "You're in the right position," Vale said. He looked out his nav screen. She would need to be reading his location transponder to know that. "How are you tracking my position?" "Sarath's operational oversight protocol," she said. "All field liaisons, it is standard." "Should I be concerned that you're in Sarath operational oversight protocol personally?" "I review the field reports," she said. "It is also standard." A pause that was not entirely standard. "Are you taking the photograph?" He had the camera in his hand already. He took the photograph and sent it. There was a pause of about 30 seconds. "The angle is correct," she said. "The left nebula is sharper in this one. Day 12 is always clearer, I told you." "You told me approximately. The data supports approximately." "Then approximately is good enough." There was a beat of silence. Not empty, the kind that had something in it, something being weighed. "How is the work?" she said. "Good." He looked out at the stars. "Found an anomalous reading on buoy 774 this morning. Might be nothing. I'm going to loop back and have a look." "What kind of anomalous reading?" He told her. She asked a specific question about the frequency deviation that told him she had either studied marginal zone buoy mechanics since their first conversation or had always known more about them than she'd let on. He suspected the latter. He answered the question. She asked a follow-up. He answered that too. They talked about the buoy for 11 minutes, and then they talked about the pass, and then they talked about the photograph, and then Vale said she needed to attend a council meeting and ended the call with a precision that was, he had come to understand, not curtness but efficiency. She did not pad the edges of conversations. He looked at the photograph on his comm screen after the call ended. The left nebula was sharper. She was right. He put the Perseverance about on course for buoy 774, and thought about the fact that the Empress of 11 star systems had just spent 11 minutes asking him questions about a relay buoy. He thought she might do it again, next pass, the one after. He thought he'd probably still be in the right position. He thought about ordinary things, and about frequencies that nobody else was listening to, and about the particular quality of someone paying careful attention, and he flew on into the good dark.